Hello and good morning, friends. Welcome to CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, once again, productive lecture on women's studies. Today we are going to talk about nature of state and women empowerment in India. Women empowerment is most talked about, and we always think and try to grab or answer all the questions which sometimes we tend to skip or sometimes we are unable to answer. But I believe that from this lecture we are able to know the answers of all those questions which are vaguely in our mind, or sometimes we find them but they are left unanswered. For this we have again with us in our studios Dr. Sushila Kaushik. She is a retired professor, and I hope that under her able guidance we would be able to learn more about the nature of state as well as the women empowerment in India. So welcome to the basic lecture, ma'am, and I hope that the way our previous sessions went on the women's studies, I hope that this session is also going to be one of the finest.
I hope so. Good morning. Good morning, all of you. I'm back here with another topic in women's studies, somewhat closer to what we have been doing all these days. This is what's called the nature of the Indian state and the women's empowerment in India. The reason why we are taking up today a phrase called the nature of the Indian state, a phrase which usually is talked about in a subject like a social science subject like political science, or perhaps in economics, is mainly because whatever we do for women in this country, especially if the state undertakes any measures for women in this country, is quite a bit influenced by the state, by the nature of the state, but by what we consider or define our Indian state to be. So this is precisely where we also will be able to explain many of the reasons why we adopted certain policy approaches, certain policies and certain measures is often in the context of what type of a state do we have. Many of the time when we find some of these policies are not really coming up well, or the implementation is lacking quite often, then once again we explain the nature of these policies or the lack of implementation or the type of implementation or the nature of implementation by the broad context in which we are attempting that, and then the broad context is the nature of Indian state. So that's why before we go into the women's policies and measures for women which the state has made, we also are trying to fit it in the context of what type of a state do we have in this country. This particular phrase, nature of Indian state, requires a certain type of explanation, especially to those who are not students of political science or not students of Indian state as such. So let me start with that. What's meant by the word nature of the state of India? We find that the states in the world presently are being divided or categorized into various types. One is called the traditional approaches, the other is more recent approach, which I particularly would like to call it as a feminist approach. The normal way in which, the traditional way in which the main social sciences, mainstream social sciences, which divide these states into is usually democratic state and authoritarian state. Very often we find many of us calling ourselves as a democratic state and not an authoritarian state. The other way in which they are being divided very often is as liberal states as against either a Marxist state or as a socialist state. The democratic and authoritarian type of a device is essentially coming on the basis of a criterion of the liberty, the amount of rights which is prevailing in a particular country, and so deciding whether we belong to authoritarian or democratic. Or to put it in other words, the way the government is formed, the relationship between the individual and the government, individual and the state, really decides whether your state is a democratic state or your state is an authoritarian state. The other types of definition which you have, liberal or socialist, liberal or Marxist, depends very much on the type of economic production we have, which the state-sponsored approach we have. If much of this sort of possession of capital as well as the various ownership pattern in the country is of a public nature, the state-owned one, then they are often defined as a Marxist or a socialist state. If they are in the hands of the private sector, mostly, not all, and the private are owning the property and they are running most of the affairs of the economic production in the country, and you have the right for that, then we normally call it as a liberal state. This is the way the mainstreams often define the states in the various countries in the world as either authoritarian or as capitalist or as liberal or as socialist or as democratic state. They overlap. A democratic state will also be a liberal state. An authoritarian state can be one which believes in capitalist or in a socialist one. So these sort of divisions are not mutually exclusive, they can always overlap. Similarly, the women studies person have looked at the state from their own angle of women studies, namely women's perspective, and how far the state, whether it's democrat or authoritarian or whether it is liberal or whether it's socialist, have been able to stand up for its women citizens. Once again, the criterion is the relationship between the women citizens and the state. What type of relationship the state has with its people, that is especially focusing on the women of that particular state. So when you begin looking at that, because women we do believe constitute 50% of the population, we do constitute they are the original citizens of the country just as men are. So in which case we also can look at them, at the state, from the point of view of women's perspective, women's studies perspective. When we do that, then we get into a type of a classification where we call it as patriarchal state or radical feminist state. How many states, or whether the Indian state is a state which is really promoting feminism, is a feminist state, or whether it is very much a patriarchal state. This is the way the women studies scholars usually approach the nature of state in India or in any other part of the world. On the basis of this sort of an approach, we have a few theories which have come up in women's studies. The theories are now quite old, and the theories are very much based on how we view that the state views the women, their contribution, their place, their role, their rights, justice, and the other concepts of women. So the most common one we have in these theories is the theory of capitalist patriarchy. Capitalist patriarchy really believes, is very much a very, very common one, very popular one. The capitalist theory, capitalist patriarchal theory really believes that the state and the society, of course, the state really benefits out of the work of the women. It believes that while the state gives the right for production, ownership, property, and many other things to the private sector, which is its economic model, economic mode of production, it at the same time, this whole setup which is called capitalism, in turn is also thriving on the work and contribution and the role of women. The basis of a capitalist model of development would be the profit and the theory of surplus value. The theory of surplus value, which forms a very important part, is the theory which believes that out of the labor of the people, the capitalist owners, or whoever is the owner of the production, is making a certain amount of surplus. Out of this surplus, the profit is earned. So when the women contribute, then they're able to make this surplus value, and out of that surplus value, the capitalist production is thriving. What type of a surplus value are the women contributing, which is more than that of the men? Namely, much of the work which the women do are really not valued. We have seen it before too. Much of the work which women do either at home or even outside, either as a domestic chores or as household production or household work, are not being valued at all economically. They are not included in any type of cost of production or national production of the country. With the result, whatever they do definitely is an economic output. Whatever they do does contribute to the production, but not being valued in any of your calculations, then that becomes a surplus value. So that is where many of the women, particularly in capitalist countries like United States, began the protest as a part of the women's movement by saying that what they are contributing either by way of the care of the child, the care of the old, the contribution, the domestic one, the care of their husband, who then can go into the offices or in the industries and do the production, or the ones who are also contributing to that production of the country. But this is not being valued, not being recognized, and not being in any way rewarded, either by way of a cash or perhaps by way of a value or recognition. So also we believe in very many things which we will see a little later, more detailed, the amount of money which is being paid to a woman for the work which she does, particularly in household production, home-based production. The woman's value, woman's contribution is totally invisible. What is visible is only how the man performs in this household production. That's why we find, for instance, in agriculture, man is the cultivator, man is the owner, man owns the land. The amount of participation which the women have in agriculture, family labor in India and South Asia and other countries, Africa, is never recognized. In fact, quite a lot of operation in agriculture is being done by women, but this is not recognized. With the result, the production by women go unrewarded. When you do not reward the women for what they do, that much money, that much of cost really goes as part of the surplus value of the production of the country as such, or of the production as such, of the industry as such, of agriculture as such. So a man can make more profit in agriculture by not paying his wife, not paying his family, not paying any of those who have contributed to it, except the manual labor which he employs, like agricultural labor. So whatever the wife and the children and the old people in the family contribute by in any of these various activities of agriculture, like winnowing, farming, and preparing the animal feed, looking after the animal, and many other things, cleaning up, and in the dairy industry, many of these activities go unpaid. And because they are unpaid, they add up to the surplus value and the profit of the agriculturists. So this is where we call this as capitalist patriarchy. It is not merely capitalism, but within the capitalist mode, you also have a theory coming up which says the surplus value is essentially coming out of the contribution of women and the family, which is not accounted for in any of your computation. So many of them believe whatever role they have been playing, the women particularly in capitalist countries, whatever role they have been playing, either by way of domestic care or domestic duties, or by way of looking after the maintenance of the house, looking after the old people, taking care of the children, or even reproducing the children, producing the children, which is also a social job that they do, go unvalued, unpaid. So that's the capitalist patriarchy model in simple terms. Of course, the scholars have worked it out in great length. The feminist economists have worked it out a lot. And so that theory has come up as a capitalist patriarchy. So that system, that state begins to be called, the nature of that state begins to be called as a capitalist patriarchal state. As against this, we have another model called socialist patriarchy. Now, the socialist patriarchy is a system which came up quite a lot in countries like Soviet Union or many other socialist countries, which does not believe in the private ownership of land or industries or any other property, which is state-owned, state-run, state-managed, where the capital cost or the profit ultimately, if it comes up, is taken by the state, and then perhaps the state spends it on a common pool for the entire population of that country. So that's a socialist system, where all the factors of production like capital, land, labor, and ultimately profit are all belonging to the state, and state in turn is the only agency which produces or owns the means of production. In such a socialist state like Soviet Union or China or many other countries in the world, what is the and what was the state or status of women? How far were the women equal in these countries? Were the women really only labor? Were the women really only citizens? Were they treated along with the men equally in all spheres of life? Was there no surplus value in those countries? Even if the state has the means of production, is there no surplus value in those countries which the state could then get and utilize as part of its income, revenue, profit, or whatever one may call it. To many people, many theoreticians in women's studies, this is not true. In socialist countries too, there is a certain amount of gender inequality and gender injustice. Even in the socialist countries, where child care as well as old age care are very much taken care of by the state, the position of women as a labor, which since all the people are equally the labor in these countries, men and women, the position of women, the status of women is still lower than the men. It has not been in the socialist countries also equally the same as men. We had lots of instances about Soviet Union, we had a lot of instances even coming out of China now or in the past, where the subjugation of women, the inferior status of women are very evident in either their economic activities or in the social activities or even in their domestic lives. Women have been still complaining. With all these things outside, the domestic chores, which the minimum amount, whatever amount they have to do, is still being done only by men. Women. The men do not participate in the domestic chores. The men do not participate in any of the problems which the women have. So with the result, the families continue to be patriarchal. The families continue to be a power-based institution, where there is a hierarchy, the man and the woman is at the lower end of the family as such. In subsequent days, there are other social problems which have also come up, like alcoholism. The tremendous amount of alcoholism which came up in some of these countries, once again the men becoming more alcoholic because they had no duty at all in domestic spheres. Childcare is taken care of, old age is taken care of, unemployment is taken care of, and the men do not share any of the work which the women do, and there is also a certain amount of disparity in the job description as well as disparity in income of the men and women even in socialist countries. So with the result, many believed even if there can be social justice in general in these countries, equal distribution of wealth, equal distribution of rights, etc., but when it comes to family and domesticity, the old patriarchal system still continued. Women did feel suppressed, women did feel discriminated against, and there was also a lot of domestic violence which began coming up because of the resentment as well as the alcoholic habits of the men in those countries. With the result, suppression of women, subordination of women, violence against women and children increased even in many of these socialist countries. So that system also, the feminists have begun calling it as not just socialism, or socialistic countries, but as socialistic patriarchal countries. So they also continue to be patriarchal. They were also not able to get rid of all the various forms of subordination and inequality, particularly what the women suffer from in even the socialist countries. So they called it as socialistic patriarchy country. Then comes what they wanted. I don't really know whether there is a country still in this world at present which the theoretical persons wanted to call as the radical feminism. That is a country or a state which is totally rid of any type of patriarchy. That maybe in a communist country which is still in the dream, no country has become a communist country in the theoretical sense of the word, because in a communism there's much more equality, which Karl Marx talks about. Everything is owned by the state and every type of distribution takes place, whereas the socialistic formations which are there are only intermediate ones. Intervening ones, they should in course of time give place to communism. That will be the ultimate target of Marxian philosophy. But maybe that sort of state would have what the radical feminists called as complete equality, complete justice between men and women in every sense of the word, whether it's within the family or outside the family, whether it's a marriage custom or anything else, marriage practices, divorce practices or equality practices, whatever it is, the radical feminists believe that women are totally independent, women have the right to practice things the way they would like to have, and no type of patriarchy, no type of inequality, no type of denial of women's rights or justice can be there in a state. That would be a highly idealistic state as the feminists would like to have it. So that school, though it is there as a school, though it is there as a theory, though it is there even as a practice among certain sections of feminism, particularly in the Western countries, we do not have still a state as an instance to give. To give as an example for radical feminism. So most of the states really figured in as part of patriarchal model. So in general, in political science, the radical feminist model, political science, almost all states in the world currently are one type of patriarchy or other. And most common type of patriarchy which we have now is what we call a liberal type of patriarchy. Most of the world today, most of the countries in the world today are democratic of one type or other. They call themselves democratic. They all have constitutions. They do go by the values of liberty, rights, equality, justice, fraternity, whatever you have. They also have role for the state. The countries, almost all the states in the world, including the United States, which is the highest form of capitalist state as of at present, you find the states have adopted a liberal policy towards its citizens. By liberal policy, one means is while they give the maximum amount of liberty, rights and all to the people, they do have a lot of private ownership and private practice, everything. The means of productions are owned by the persons, by the people, individuals, but still the state keeps for itself the right to intervene. The right to intervene in your economic affairs, the right to intervene in your social affairs, the right to put an end to various types of atrocities which may be perpetuated in any part of the state, and the state definitely in today's context are intervening in a lot of cases through its various institutions like legislature, executive, judiciary and other types of agencies which they have created to protect and promote the rights and freedom of the weaker sections, minorities in every state. The state is not totally leaving these sections at the mercy of economic operations, demand and supply, or profit and loss, things like that. It is taking upon itself the role of promoting and protecting the vulnerable sections in the country. And most of the countries do believe now that women are one of the vulnerable sections in their own state. They may have various types of vulnerable sections like a minority and other things, colored, but almost all states are considering now women as one who deserve, require, need a certain type of a special protection from the state. So whether it's put in the Constitution very clearly or it is subsumed under the fundamental rights of all citizens to be equal. After all, American Constitution starts by saying all men are created equal. And they do believe men include women, though the radical feminists do not believe men include women, so they find fault with the American Constitution. The belief behind it is all are created equal, and if all are created equal, women are also created equal. But in practice, they have found that women require a little more than that. They little privileges, little protection by way of special measures. Increasingly, the violence against them is attracting the attention and the protection of the state, machinery of the state. In India, definitely, this is a liberal patriarchal model. Whether it's patriarchal or not, I'll come to that a little later. But it is definitely a liberal country. We even started in India in the 1950 Constitution, the major Constitution of India, namely with a very clear-cut understanding that our vulnerable sections, the minorities, the scheduled castes, the tribes, and women require special mention, special protection in the various sections of the Constitution. The most important ones we do have in our Constitution, which protects the people, particularly the weaker sections, is the fundamental rights of the Constitution. And for these fundamental rights, the Constitution starts in that particular section by saying that all are created, all are treated in the same way. Nothing will make any type of a distinction or discrimination among the people of India on the basis of caste, class, creed, or sex. This is how our religion, this is how our fundamental rights are starting with in the Constitution. And our preamble, even before that, says we give ourselves a democratic, sovereign democratic republic. Later on we change it to sovereign democratic socialist republic. So that is we the people of India, and we counted among the people of India all these vulnerable sections and almost 50% of the women. So both the preamble and fundamental rights definitely assure us the fundamental equality, fundamental rights, and many other types of rights and justice by the Constitution. But then the Constitution also recognized that by itself it may not be enough. If we give all these various generic type of positions, that may not by itself prove enough protection for the sections which are not equal. When the fundamental rights was given in 1950, all sections of the country were not really socially or economically equal. So there were big sections of the population which were less than equal for historical reasons. So the result is the Constitution found the need to mention these sections separately and see what we can do about it. So in Directive Principles of State Policy, which follows very quickly after fundamental rights in our Constitution, we have given very special provisions for talking about what the state can do in the future years by way of the constitutional provisions for the women and children. I'm not talking about SC, I'm not talking about ST here. We are especially focusing only on women. So there the Directive Principles of State Policy says that nothing in this Constitution will prevent the state from undertaking anything for the good, for promoting the good of women and children. So the Constitution empowers the state, and not only a big state but even states of India, to undertake measures or make policies which they think will give the women the needed and the children the needed protection and special measures. Often it's called as the privilege. special privileges for women and children, often it's being accused of as going against the liberal principle of equality for all citizens of the country. But then over a period of time, not getting into those controversies, over a period of time the judiciary has stood by these provisions, and the judiciary has enabled the state in the future to formulate policies, administrative measures and many other things for the sake of promoting the health and the children and the welfare of the women and the children. So with the result, in the past so many years, since we became independent, which is almost 60 years now, we have been able to formulate a lot of social legislations. The states have done it, the center has done it, a lot of legislations for the sake of promoting the development and the rights of women and children in this country. That's why not merely India becomes a good liberal state, a democratic state, but India also has become somewhat a pro-women state, in the sense with a certain amount of consciousness about the low position of women and children in this country. So maybe one would be better calling India something like a welfareist state, rather than merely a democratic state. A democratic state could be capitalist, a democratic state also can be a socialist. But a democratic state which we have is a welfare state, where the state has adopted a lot of measures in various fields for the protecting the weaker sections of the community, and also to put an end to a lot of things which may emanate in the future, which goes against the interest of the people as a whole. In the context of women and children, definitely India is a liberal democratic state which has a particular edge for looking into the issues of women and children. But does this mean India is not a patriarchal state? That's the question. What the feminists would argue is, yes, it's liberal. Yes, it's not totally a capitalist state or whatever it is that the economists will be arguing about, but it is not a patriarchal state. It also has a lot of elements of patriarchy, both by way of constitution or the subsequent types of policies, measures, legislations, which we have adopted for this country, particularly promoting the women and children. Their critique of constitution. There's a lot of feminist critique of our constitution and our state. The feminist critique of constitution really talks about, starting with fundamental rights, it talks about the particular right which has been given for religion. People to pursue the religion, propagate the religion is a fundamental right in a diverse, multiple, pluralistic country like ours, which is a very positive feature of the constitution. But then, as they go along in trying to give this right to religion to the various religious sections of our country, we have also assured them in our fundamental rights that the personal law will be prevailing. The state will recognize, guarantee, protect the personal laws and the customs and traditions of the various religions in this country. It's a part of fundamental rights. And fundamental rights, by its definition, are not justiciable. That is, they cannot be amended or suspended for a long time. And the judiciary, you cannot take it to the judiciary and try to negotiate it, so they are not justiciable. You cannot go to the court against the fundamental rights which has been given by the Constitution. You can amend them, but you cannot take a case up to the court. With the result, these personal laws and the customs and tradition acquire a very definite constitutional status with protection from the judiciary. What's wrong about it? What's wrong about it is many of the personal laws and religious rituals, customs and traditions and religious beliefs in all the religions in the world perhaps, but in all the religions in India are anti-women in many of their provisions. Whether it's Hinduism or Christianity or Islam or Parsi or any other religions we have in this country, they have got laws, customs and traditions which are very patriarchal. This gets then protected by the Constitution. Unwarrantedly, unaware, these particular fundamental rights has ended up protecting these ones. To then make a change in them, legally make a change in them, becomes a very, very difficult task for this country. Even if you want subsequently to do these changes, many of our liberal leaders, political parties have been wanting to bring about a little change in this. A lot of feminist movements have asked for it, but we are not able to do it. For instance, there is a provision in the directive principles of state policy, which these days have again become up as a discussion point, but we have had it every now and then, the Uniform Civil Code. The directive principles of the state policy says states should aim to bring about this uniform civil code. This is a sort of antidote to the fundamental rights, the right to religion and the right to personal laws. When the controversy took place in the Constituent Assembly itself, they tried to reduce the seriousness of it by bringing in the directive principles of state policy, where they put uniform civil code for all religions. The women in this country, whether it's marriage or divorce or property or guardianship or adoption, whatever are the various institutions, should have the similar laws all over India, irrespective of the religion or caste or region in this country. Because we do have a wide variety of tribals who have their own laws, who have their own positions. But unfortunately, that uniform civil code cannot be brought about in this country till today. Every time we begin talking, it becomes a controversy, it becomes a big argument, it becomes a political issue, burning issue, then we put them in the back burner. And with the result, till today, the personal laws continue to be a very dominant one in the lives of. This is very important for us because it governs every aspect of a woman's life, ever since she is born. From the time a girl child is born to almost at death, the personal laws govern our lives. Our religion govern our lives, our caste govern our lives, our customs really dictate our lives. With the result, women are not able to come out of it, and whatever they try to do little radically, they are being punished for that every now and then. And so that leads to a lot of suppression and violence against women in practice, legally speaking. So this is something which you couldn't do. In between 1950 and 54, our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, attempted this as far as Hinduism went, but he also had to face a lot of challenges in the process. But finally it ended up as 4 separate laws rather than one big codification, and that becomes the Hindu Code Act, or Hindu Code Acts as we call it, which dealt with only the Hindu women. It only gave the rights to Hindu women for divorce, maintenance, property, and other issues related to women and marriage, which very often now call it as family laws, and they only apply to Hindu women, not to the women of other communities, other religions in our country, because there was a lot of hesitation about it at that particular political atmosphere about it. And so also in the process, the Hindu customs, whatever was there, could get finally codified. The family law for Hindus have got codified, and little late, once you codify a law, then you can amend it later on. If you don't codify a law at all, then it remains as religion. It remains as customs, remain as traditions. Then there is no question of amending it. You can change it by social change, but you do not change it by law. With the result, the Hindu codification has been tremendously helpful to women. So that further changes, Hindu women, further changes could be brought about. But similar codification could not be done for other religions in this country by our state. Particularly, the opposition comes when we touch the religion Islam. Much of the Christianity has adopted what is usually called Western system, Western laws. Even there, but in India, there are a lot of aspects of, I'm not getting into detail, but there are a lot of aspects in those religions too, their traditions too, their practices too, which is quite anti-women. So whether it's Parsi or Christian or Judaism, whatever religions we have in this country, they all have. But often we are tried to touch the Islamic codes, the Muslim personal law, because they are the second important religious community in this country. numerically the largest minority in this country. And there also has been a lot of opinions coming from within them to make these changes. But somehow we have not been able to do. With the result, this remains as a very important, outstanding patriarchal trait of the Indian constitution and Indian legal system and Indian society practices. So directive principles of state policy even otherwise was meant to be a little bit of inferior status because they are not justiciable. They are justiciable in the court, and whereas fundamental rights cannot. And whenever there is a contradiction between the two, the judges have been ably put across saying fundamental rights are important, but it has to be viewed and interpreted in harmonious construction. That's a legal word. Harmonious construction along with directive principles of state policy. So thereby we have been able to get some benefits over a period of time based on the directive principles of state policy, and rather than merely on the basis of fundamental rights. Which is something very important to us to show whether but it's a debatable point still with a lot of feminists, whether our constitution is totally egalitarian or at least men and women alike in every sense of the word, spiritually and otherwise, or whether it continues to be a patriarchal state. Then when we did take in details of our various social legislations which have adopted, including Hindu Code Act, we do find, even though most of these acts are very radical and immediately were extremely welcomed, over a period of time when we began doing it, we found that they all have a lot of patriarchal elements about it. Either being formulation, or having a little loopholes in them, or ultimately in being implemented in actual thing. It has been always left to judiciary in this country to interpret them in the light of the basic discussions which are held in the Constituent Assembly. That's one of the reasons why all the feminists should read the Constituent Assembly debates and see the motivations and the aims and targets of the members of the Constituent Assembly when they formulated the. And it also helps us to interpret the Constitution in the proper light at a later stage. So we have religious personal rights. It got the Muslim attempt to have any effort with the Muslim laws came to a crumble when the Shah Banu case came up. Huge movement took place in India when Shah Banu went to the court asking for maintenance along not just what the Muslim traditions gave, but what the state could give her in case she was treated as an ordinary equal citizen of this country. But it was denied to her. It's a big story, long story. Ultimately, that sort of a maintenance from the state or maintenance from the husband of a nature which is equivalent to his status in society or her status in society was not given. Instead, the decision was made by our legislature, Parliament, by making a law by which she would be given only what is possible for her within the religious fold. So the judges gave Shah Banu a great boost by demanding a maintenance of a higher nature. But then the Parliament made an amendment and they brought a new law, Muslim Women Divorce Maintenance Act, by which that was reduced, the judiciary's judgment was reduced to just making her being a dependent on her family rather than on the husband to get proper maintenance level to her. The right to property and inheritance rights have been given to Hindu women and the equal amount, and this also has two types of mitraksha rights as well as the rights which comes by the will of your parents, what they earned. There are a lot of changes which came up in India after that. India being a diverse country, many parts of India formulated laws following the constitutional principles in spirit and letter, but many others didn't do it. So finally, by now, we have almost all states of India, we have formulated equal rights for women to inherit property, both from the inherited property as well as from the parental property, and many other side legislations have come up trying to give Hindu women a share in all this. The other religions continue to follow what they have been doing it, and the divorce maintenance again is the same issue. But what is happening in practice is something which is extremely questionable, whether all the Hindu women have been able to inherit property over a period of time. Now it's 30-40 years, whether Hindu women have been able to inherit property. No. In reality, when the will is being written by the parents, much of the property goes really only to the sons. It is not given to the daughters. The argument is something which we saw before also once. The dowry versus property is constantly coming up. We have given you dowry, so we will not give you property. And in the same way, in some cases, you do have the property, even if it is given to a girl in many parts of India, like southern part of India is a little more egalitarian in this. The girls give away that to the brothers. It's called power of attorney. I can't do it, so you run it on my behalf and you have all the benefits and the losses derived out of it. So they just give it away to the brothers, which is called power of attorney, and thereby the sons get their share as well as the daughters' share equally distributed among them. Many of the daughters will know about it. It's not that ignorance is the reason. The reason once again comes from patriarchal society. We are not expected to demand our right to property. We are not expected to retain property even if it is given to us. We do believe boys have more work to do to look after their parents and get married, their younger children or younger sisters or their brothers. Many of the family responsibilities belong to the sons and not to the daughters, because daughters go away. So with the result, the sons need more money, more property. So the daughters understand this, and many of the daughters willingly give away the property which comes to them. The result is most of the women in this country still cannot claim to have any property. They neither get it from the husband side nor they get it from the parental side, and this is one of the important reasons for the dependency status of women in this country, thereby all the other types of violence, dowry, domestic violence, sati, wherever it took place. If in case any girl makes a demand for the property, she is outcasted, she is thrown out, she loses the parental support. So once again, it's not considered as a good thing. It's not a feminine thing. It is not Indian woman stuff that she should be claiming property or equality. These customs and traditional values being still prevalent, even though we have extremely good legislations, it is not actually being implemented in favor of women. So in practice, the implementation remains very patriarchal. The society remains very patriarchal. The values continue to be what they are instead of getting a change thanks to the legislation. That's not coming up very well at all. The same is true about divorce. All the women think many times over before they can resort to divorce in case of an unfair, violent family. Though the rate of divorce is increasing, still many women try not to recourse to it if it's possible. Maintenance. The courts decide maintenance, but do the women get the maintenance? Is it coming very regularly? Is it coming very smoothly? Even the decision of how much maintenance should be given to the woman, is it being done very smoothly and nicely, gentlemanly? Or very often it leads to a lot of cruelty as well as a lot of unfair practices. And getting the maintenance amount little later after it is decided also has very often become an issue for women. It's a problem for them to get it because society still believes whatever the court may decide, I will not give it or I'll give it less. That's again a sound of patriarchy all over. Child care, guardianship, adoption, these are also issues which are very much related to family laws, but they are not being maintained properly by the social or even including legal practices. For instance, even our own child care beliefs The, the laws even believe that the maintenance of a child, caring for the child really belongs to the mother till the child is 18 years old or 12 years old, definitely. Now this is born out of definite good intentions. Child care definitely is, child should be definitely with the mother. Mother is a better component of the child's care than perhaps a father would be. But in practice it has become a responsibility. In practice it has become an unshared burden. The woman really has to work twice, thrice, especially in case she is a single woman, working woman, going out of the house and doing other things. Then the child care definitely is an added on responsibility on her. Many women do it very willingly and happily, but still it takes a toll on them. By the time the child is 12 years old, we know the law, they can decide where to, but then the father only gets a visiting rights. Guardianship. The guardianship in India still continues to be that of the father. The natural guardian of a child is still considered to be a father and not the mother. We have adopted it, we have fought for it, the feminists have said nothing doing, but even then, the banks and the other financial institutions are extremely reluctant to give this guardianship to a woman. In fact, when you go admission forms, you require the signature of father and the mother. If the mother is not there, the schools don't mind, but if the father is not there, they raise their eyebrows. Then they say, go and bring the father's signature. Though now we have made a legislative law that it is enough if you have the signature of one person. It need not be both. Still, the social questioning is very much there when you take only the mother's signature and not both the signature or father's. Nobody questions if the mother's signature is not there. But people do question if the father's signature is not there. When you go to financial transactions, you want to open an account in the name of your daughter or son before they are 18. Who has to sign the form? Who will be the guardian? Once again, the state has made this rule that you don't have to insist on the father being the guardian. Mother can be a guardian. Even then, it requires a tremendous amount of arguments on the part of a mother to say, I am the guardian, I will keep the care of my child. About 10 years back or 15 years back, no bank will take mother's signature or mother as the guardian. But now, of course, the banks are slowly realizing it. There's some sensitivity which has come into them that they allow, but only after thorough questioning. Why is it you want to be there? Why not the father? You have to give 1,000 odd answers, and then they may allow you till the age of 18. The mother can continue to be a guardian of her accounts and other things, but this has not yet been universally smoothly a transition for the women of India. Adoption. Once again, adoption is, if you want to adopt, if a single woman wants to adopt a baby, if a woman who is divorced wants to adopt a baby, if an unmarried woman wants to adopt a baby, it is still the laws are against her. Still, there's not only doubt and questioning, the single woman is not even given the adoption by the rights of the court. Somehow they believe the single woman cannot look after a baby very well when it is mother and child who are constantly talked together. To be a mother, so motherhood becomes an extremely important aspect of your citizenship. Any woman above the age of 18, they immediately expect you to be your mother. Mother and child go together in our constitution, in our laws, in our policies. You have a department for women which is called Department of Women and Child Development. There is no separate department called Department for Women. You have a directive principles of state policy which talks in terms of for the promotion of the good of women and children. Again, children are not separated from mother, and mother is not devoid of children at all in this country. Women and children, which means every woman is supposed to be expected to be a mother. This is not actually put there, but the common mentality in this country is motherhood is important to a woman, marriage is important to a woman, and then motherhood is important to a woman, and a woman who does not have a child in this country still is treated with a certain amount of contempt or questioning by the rest of the members of the society. The enormous amount of increase in dowry violence or domestic violence is mainly because many of the children, many of the women are not able to produce babies. Leave alone girl babies, but they are not able to produce babies at all. Often it leads to divorce. Not merely among the Hindus, but even among the Muslims, I've heard it a lot. Then we also have instances, enormous amount of increase in surrogate motherhood in this country. This is a very recent phenomenon, but it has come up quite a lot. The way it is increasing so fast is mainly because a woman is expected to have a baby. Your family has to have children. You cannot have childless families in this country. You invoke a lot of religion in this thing. If there is no child, many things cannot happen to you in the future. Your funeral rights, your many other things are dependent on your having children. And property. So the childless couples are not really treated very nicely in our society, thereby showing enormous amount. So one can go on saying both our society and the state are very much still patriarchal. Though there is a lot of social legislations which have been made, particularly for Hindu women, in terms of getting rid of the patriarchal element, or at least reducing it, we find as we go along more and more of the patriarchal aspects really strengthening themselves and exhibiting themselves to the detriment of the liberty and equality and justice to women as such. Then we come to some of our economic policies. The same sort of stuff you find in that. Whether you talk in terms of the census surveys, which gives you the statistics about how many women population, how many are working, how many are development, how many of them are female-headed households, or if you think in terms of the value which you put into their household occupations, which is not really domestic chores but economic activities, or when we talk about the home-based occupations or self-employment programs, any one of these programs you take up, you find the element of patriarchy is hovering around you all over. You find the women do not produce, they do not have any work other than washing and cleaning the household goods and producing babies. Producing babies, of course, definitely has no economic value in a country which is producing so much that family planning goes on. Maybe in a country like Russia, producing a baby is a social and a political and an economic value, but not in this country. So you can see, I'm not getting into too many of these things right now, because at a subsequent time we may be able to see women as workers and the laws which have been made for women as well as generally for employment and labor in this country, and find how in every one of them you have an element of patriarchy creeping in the thinking process, not formulation of the policies themselves are wrong very often. Because policies are being made by men. That's the basic reason. Policies are being made by men with very few women at the policy making level, either as administrators or as managers or heads of institutions, or as what I will consider now political leaders. If the policies and amendments and acts and legislations are being made by Parliament of India, then we find we have very few women who are sitting there, very few correct type of women sitting there, whose mind itself is not already internalizing patriarchy, very few of them sitting there in formulating the policies. Same is true about our administration. Very few bureaucrats, very few administrators, managers, heads of the institutions are women. Very, very small figure, 6% to 7% in entire India, and about 11% of members of parliament and 1 or 2 members of cabinet are all women in this country. With no leadership coming from women to the women's issues, we find the men are making the policies, men are implementing the policies. I'll give a very specific instance was the Domestic Violence Act. The Domestic Violence Act, when it was first drafted, it has one clause called the men who habitually are used to be beating their wives. Who put that there? The men who put it there. They don't want to be caught. As I came to know, if 80% of the men are beating their wives, a lot of parliamentarians also must be beating their wives. So they do not want to put it there as men who beat their wives. So they added.
Ma'am, you have given a very good examples over here. That is the mentality which needs to be changed from time to time.
Right.
Although the laws are mandatory, as well as the mentality, as we persistently through this lecture try to give you. So with this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for delivering such a nice lecture. And tomorrow also, Dr. Kaushik would be with us, and we would be discussing on a new topic on the women's studies. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.